Hey rock fan, I have a doozy of an article for you today from this magazine right here, Alternative Guitar 3. Now, in the early 90s to mid 90s, guitar-oriented music, specifically grunge, was huge, and it was really the mainstream type of music on the radio back then. And it's not like today. Today is mainly pop, hip-hop, and the rock radio stations are far and few between. But back then, as a guitar player myself, learning guitar, loving the guitar, playing gigs, it was an ideal era to just grow up in the early to mid 90s. And Guitar World was already a famous magazine, but they started releasing alternative guitar side magazine to placate to a lot of the grunge stuff and a lot of the alternative, quote unquote, music coming out back then. And I dug it all up. This is one of them. And I'm going to talk about one of my favorite bands back then, Silverchair, believe it or not. Silverchair, they weren't one of the original grunge bands, right? Like Nirvana and Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, they all came out early 90s. But they were one of the, I mean, you could call them like imitators. You know how, just like any movement, a lot of the music companies start signing or looking for bands similar to what's popular at the time. And Silverchair was one of them. Luckily, they were early on. A lot of what happens in movements is that by the end, nearing the 7 to 8 year mark, or even before that nowadays, it's probably much faster, the trend tends to die down. But these companies, music companies, are still trying, and so they're still trying to sign bands that kind of sound like the originators. And a lot of times it just becomes super watered down, pretty much crap. Now, Silverchair wasn't one of those bands. They were early on. A big reason why you listen to music is you want some inspiration. Not only is the music awesome, but you want to be inspired. Either their singer inspires you, the lyric inspires you, or something about that band inspires you. And for me, being young, a guitar player, kind of in high school, I was really drawn to Silverchair because these guys were all in their teens. They were like me. They were in their teens. And I think they were probably like 14, 15, 16 years old. And they were playing like awesome songs. And that really in itself inspired me. Not only did I like the music, I liked their story essentially behind the band and how they came up. All right, so let's get into this article. Now, they interviewed Daniel Johns, so he's the main songwriter, singer, and guitar player. They were a trio. They were drummer, bass player, but he's the main guy. So they interview him, and so I'm really curious to see where his mindset was at. Remember, keep in mind, he was a teenager. Okay, so let's just see where they were at, and let's do this. Putting these suckers on. All right, clarity. Okay, Silverchair by Gary Graff. Daniel Johns and his Silverchair cohorts are not old enough to drive. By their own accounts, they don't date much either. They are a band of Kalo youth, but they do have a hit record. While certainly not the first smooth-cheeked youngsters to attain stardom, Silverchair are a whole lot hippier than Tiffany or Menudo. Not sure what they're referring to. I hope they're not referring to Tiffany back in the 80s that, as an elementary kid, had a huge crush on. Tiffany. What was her hit? I Think I'm Alone Now, I think, is the hit. And she did a cover of the Beatles, I Want to Hold Your Hand. But anyways, I think she had about 2 albums in her. Huge crush on her. So hopefully they're not knocking her, because I'd be very disappointed. All right, let's continue. Their hit Tomorrow, 4 minutes of steamy grunge that could easily have come out of Seattle as Newcastle, Australia. Silverchair's home port marked the band as hot, fresh newcomers on the modern rock scene. Fresh is the operative term, as John is just 16 and his bandmates, bassist Chris Joannou and drummer Ben Gillies, are only 15. All three are in the Australian equivalent of 10th grade. Wow. Not too long ago, they were carefree surfer dudes playing rugby on the beach and making up rap songs in their bedrooms. Eventually, they got instruments. Joannou had to be cajoled into taking up bass and became basement rock stars. We just expected to play in a garage for the rest of our lives, says Johns, I should say. We just expected to play in a garage for the rest of our lives, says Johns. But all that changed when they entered a tape of 3 songs, including Tomorrow, in a radio station competition. They won first prize, which included the chance to record the song professionally and film a video. So can you imagine? Can you imagine at that age, you enter a contest, you win, and all of a sudden money's thrown at you to record these songs and film a video? Man, what a freaking wet dream that must have been for them. I'm assuming they only had 3 songs. Their album Frogstomp, if you haven't heard it, go check it out. It's pretty cool. It's very raw, very basic stuff, but man, it really still gets me to this day. And they probably had to round out their songs and come up with additional songs to come up with an album. Pretty cool. Tomorrow took off, spending 6 weeks at number 1 in Australia and netting Silverchair a record contract. And then their Frogstomp album entered the Australian charts at number 1, leading to a chance to ply their adolescent craft across the Pacific. That goes to show what kind of period that was. For these kids to come out with an album, a rock-oriented album, and hit number 1, that was just unbelievable. And that could only happen back then. If kids try to do that today, absolutely not. It's a different setting, different landscape right now with the internet. That was pre-internet. Now you got to remember, the printing of this album originally appeared in Guitar World December 1995. That was like the early days of the internet, and for a band like that to break out worldwide is pretty amazing. Absolutely amazing. Okay, let's continue. Perhaps most surprisingly of all, the band has met with similarly spectacular success here in the birthplace of grunge. Silverchair is managed by the musicians' mothers, but when it comes to talking guitar, Johns makes it clear that it's he who holds the axe strings. Alright, Guitar World asks, what was your first guitar? Daniel Johns replies, I just got a guitar about 3.5 years ago, and it was like a $70 really cheap guitar. I learned 3 chords. One of the first songs I played was Paranoid by Black Sabbath, and then I started doing Rock and Roll by Led Zeppelin and stuff like that. Those were your influences? Yep, Black Sabbath, Deep Purple, and that kind of stuff. You're a little young for those groups. Where'd you hear them? That's exactly what I was asking myself. My parents' record collection, he says. Of course it was. It was either that or an older sister and older brother. They all have that music in there, and I couldn't afford to buy my own CDs. They had a lot of Deep Purple, Black Sabbath, Led Zeppelin, The Doors. What were you doing with your time before you picked up the guitar? We just surf and chuck the football around down at the park. It was a rugby league football. I didn't really play in positions. We used to go around for fun and chuck the ball around. Are you much of a surfer? We do it as much as we can. We're not really good. It's just fun, something to do. So was it love at first sight when you got your guitar? Were you playing all the time? John says, not really. When I first got it, I didn't know how to play anything. I just picked it up, never really practiced at all. Then I learned classical guitar for a year and started practicing a lot. It was all right. The reason I did it was I got a Deep Purple video and Richie Blackmore said he did classical training for a year, so I wanted to copy him. Did you learn much from those lessons? Yeah, I learned a lot, John says. It made me practice more. I had to get stuff right for when the guitar guy came. He was pretty good. How did you jump from your parents' music to your own favorites? My dad went and bought a Soundgarden record because he heard they sounded like Black Sabbath. He turned it on and I really liked it. Then someone told me to sit down and listen to Pearl Jam, and I really liked that. Oh yeah, PJ baby. For those of you listening, I'm wearing their t-shirt. Then my next door neighbor said, if you like Black Sabbath, listen to Helmet. She had all the Helmet records. Now I'm really into that and Tool, the Rollings bands and Quicksand, bands like that. Good taste, my friend. Guitar World asks, how much does it grind you when everybody talks about how much Silverchair sounds like a Seattle band? Not too much, really. Pearl Jam and Soundgarden were really big influences when we first got our record contract. I still like them and listen to them a little bit, but we don't like them now as much as we like Helmet and Tool. We're more into that New York hardcore kind of sound right now. That's more our new stuff. That's more of what our new stuff sounds like. It's heavy music, but it's still with a melody, not full-on screaming like Rollins. I can't do that. It sounds dumb. What were your first songs? Me and Ben started writing rap songs first. They went for about 20 seconds or something, and it was just something to do. Then I started learning guitar at 12 or so and started writing proper songs. They were really bad. The first one was Felt Like It. It had 3 or 4 chords in it. Probably Tomorrow was the first proper song we wrote that we liked. Have you become Australia's biggest guitar hero since Angus Young? John says, I'm not a guitar hero. To me, it's just part of being in a band. And it's like it's not like a main instrument. It's part of the band. You mean there isn't a wicked soloist lurking inside you? John says, I don't really like that kind of stuff. I never really liked it. I don't think it sounds good if you're in a 3-piece band, really. It just loses all his guts and you're just playing this riff and all of a sudden you go into this really fast guitar solo and stuff. Okay, him saying that though, I gotta say Frogstomp has some really kick-ass solos. So obviously something in him loves to solo. It's interesting you feel that way because all of your early heroes like Blackmore and Tommy Iommi love to take solos. Yeah, we like that kind of stuff, but if you've got to be... All right. We like that kind of stuff, but you've got to be good and be able to do that. I can't do it, he laughs. We used to be a four-piece, and I played quite a few solos back then, but when the other guitarist left, I just said, stuff this, we're just going to keep it sounding ballsy, fat, and cut out all the solos. Sometimes, like in Tomorrow, there's a little bit of a guitar solo, but that's as much as we do. None of our new songs have any guitar solos or anything. Usually a guitar solo for me is just a breakdown in the song or a bit of a change. Wow, so that was like definitely the signs of the times, because pre-grunge it was all about shredding and how fast you can play and how many notes you can fit in a second. But grunge really killed all that and solos went away. Metallica's album Saint Anger came out during that whole grunge stage and they totally killed their solos. So it sounds totally different and looks like he's definitely influenced by that whole grunge movement. What's your favorite solo on a record? My favorite guitarist ever is Ritchie Blackmore, but my favorite solo is Jimmy Page in Heartbreaker. That's an unreal solo. Page was an influence too? Yeah, quite a bit. We used to listen to Led Zeppelin all the time. Ben was probably the most influenced by Led Zeppelin. He loved John Bonham. I was more into Deep Purple and Black Sabbath. Who are your favorite guitarists from punk and alternative rock movements? Johns says, I don't really like individual guitarists. I like guitar riffs. I don't say, I like the guitarist, but I don't like the band. Who are your favorite guitarists from the punk and alternative rock movements? I don't really like individual guitarists, he says. I like guitar riffs. I don't say, I like the guitarist, but I don't like the band. If it's a good guitarist and a bad band, I wouldn't like him any better. He has a good point, because if it's a bad band, you probably won't listen to music. Anyways, do you feel like you're still improving? As long as you're playing, I guess, you're always improving. I'm not really keen on being the best guitarist and seeing who can play the best solos and stuff. To me, a guitarist is part of the band. As long as I like what we're playing, as long as I keep good time and don't stuff up too much, I don't care if I improve too much. Do you take music class in school? Yeah, it really sucks. You do really dumb crap you don't want to do. Just stupid old folk songs and stuff. You just sit there tapping wood sticks. It's really bad. You have a hit album, though. Don't the teachers treat you any differently? Nah, they just treat us like the other people. They say, okay, sit down and shut up. And we sit there and we don't say anything. One of my friends in class really likes punk. So when we get free time, he picks up an acoustic guitar and they get on the drums just to muck around. And we'll play a really fast song. It usually sounds really bad, but it's super fun. Okay, as you can see, Daniel Johns' answers are not the most sophisticated. Again, keep in mind, he's like 15 or 16. And it's all about having fun. That's the essence of it. Even to this day, like I'm pushing 50 right now. I turned 50 this year. And I try to get together with the boys every couple of weeks to just jam out. And you know what? The attitude when you get together with the guys in the rehearsal room and you're just jamming away, it's like the attitude that Daniel Johns is saying right now. It's all about having fun. It's all about playing and not really worrying if it's good or not. You're just playing. Could be super bad, but it's super fun, and that's where we're at right now, me and the guys, and that's what it comes down to, and that totally translates to what he's saying. But it's awesome. Stomp Rock was great, and then I gotta say they started weaning down in the second album. I thought it was a Nirvana copy. It was too much like Nirvana. One thing I really did appreciate about Silverchair is that they did evolve their sound, and as Daniel Johns matured, his songwriting matured, and the sound evolved and matured as well. I got to give it up for Frogstomp, though. That's a classic. When that came out, obviously they were in their teens, they were young, so they're influenced by grunge, so it does sound grungy, but what really inspired me was, like I said, the fact that they were so young, so that album definitely is special. Now, there were ones after that. Freak Show, that was okay. It was still grungy. It was still Nirvana-esque. But then they started evolving with Neon Ballroom and then Diorama. And then the last one, released back in 2007, Young Modern. That was a drastic change of their sound. So I really did appreciate that. I love bands that evolve. Don't get me wrong. I love AC/DC. We all bow to AC/DC. Untouchable. But I prefer a band that kind of changes their sound and evolves. You gotta have to, because you're a songwriter. If you're starting writing songs from 15, they're definitely gonna sound different than when you're 30. So I really appreciated Silverchair, and they're a very unique band. I think they're probably one of the most famous bands out of Australia. All right, I hope you enjoyed that little interview. I certainly did. It definitely took me back, especially reading about Frogstomp and me sitting in my room and just blasting that and just being inspired by them. Woof! I tell you, I'm hoping kids these days have the same thing. I'm sure they do. I just love to see rock be a little bit more mainstream these days, but again, that's just an old fart talking.